Look, I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking before I even get started. But hear me out, because what happened to me back in 2010 changed everything I thought I knew about those woods behind my property. I've lived on the edge of this forest my whole life. 3 generations of my family have hunted these mountains, and I grew up tracking deer and bear with my old man before I could barely hold a rifle straight. By the time I was in my 30s, I'd taken just about every kind of game you can imagine from these woods. My cabin walls tell that story pretty clearly. Some of those trophies are the kind you brag about at the bar. Others, well, let's just say game wardens wouldn't be too happy if they came poking around. But there was always one thing missing, one trophy I never thought I'd actually get a chance at. Growing up, you heard the stories. Every kid around here did. Old-timers at the general store would swap tales about something big moving through the trees at night. Campers would come back saying they heard screaming that didn't sound like any animal they knew. Loggers found footprints that made a grown man's boot look like a child's shoe. Most folks dismissed it as bears standing up on their hind legs, or maybe too much whiskey around the campfire. But I always wondered, and wondering turned into hoping, and hoping turned into something like an obsession. The thing about hunting is once you've taken everything there is to take, you start looking for the impossible. That's how I justified it to myself anyway. Looking back now, I can see how stupid and selfish that was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In early spring of 2010, I invested in some motion-activated trail cameras. Told my wife I was concerned about predators getting too close to the property, maybe a bear or mountain lion. That was partly true. We'd had some dogs go missing in the area, and folks were nervous, but honestly, I was hoping for something else entirely. I set up 6 cameras total, spread out over about 5 square miles of the densest forest behind my land. Placed them on game trails, near water sources, anywhere I thought something big might pass through. Checked them every few days, downloading the footage onto my computer and going through it frame by frame. For months, it was exactly what you'd expect. Deer at dawn, raccoons at night, a black bear sow with cubs in late May, coyotes, turkey, even caught a bobcat once, which was pretty cool. But nothing unusual, nothing that made me sit up straight in my chair and lean closer to the screen. I started to think maybe the old-timers really were just telling stories. Maybe I'd been chasing shadows and legends, wasting time and money on cameras that showed me exactly what I already knew was out there. Then came September. I remember the date exactly. September 17th, 2010. I pulled the SD card from my northeast camera, the one I'd mounted near a creek about 2 miles into the woods. Brought it home, made myself dinner, settled into my usual routine of fast-forwarding through hours of nothing. At first, I almost missed it. The timestamp said 3:47 a.m. The camera's infrared kicked on, illuminating maybe 30 feet of forest floor in that weird greenish-gray wash. Something was moving. I stopped, rewound, played it again. There was a deer in the frame, young one, maybe 80 pounds. It was drinking from the creek, completely unaware. And then from the left side of the screen, something else entered the frame. My first thought was bear. Had to be. But bears don't move like that. This thing was walking upright, fully bipedal, with a smooth gait that looked almost human, except it was massive. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Broad shoulders, arms that hung down past where its knees would be, covered head to toe in dark hair that seemed to shimmer slightly in the infrared. I watched as it approached the deer. The deer finally sensed something, started to bolt, but it was too late. The creature moved with a speed that seemed impossible for something that size. One moment it was 10 feet away, the next it had closed the distance and grabbed the deer with both hands. The whole thing was over in seconds. The deer struggled briefly, but this thing was strong, incredibly strong. It held the deer almost casually, like you or I might hold a house cat. Then it turned, and for just a moment, its face was visible in the infrared. Conical head, pronounced brow ridge, flat nose, eyes that reflected the camera's light with an eerie, empty glow. Then it walked off frame, carrying the deer like it weighed nothing. I sat there staring at the screen for I don't know how long. My heart was hammering, my hands were shaking. I must have watched that clip 50 times that night, looking for any sign it was fake, any indication I was seeing something other than what I thought I was seeing. But there was no denying it. I'd actually caught one on camera. The smart thing would have been to call someone, show the footage to a university, or at least tell a friend. But I didn't do that. Because the second I watched that video, all I could think about was mounting that thing's head on my wall, having the one trophy nobody else could claim, being the guy who actually did it. Looking back, I hate that version of me. I really do. But that's the truth of it. I went back out the next morning to check if the camera had captured anything else. It had. This one was from the same night, about 2 hours after the first clip. 4:52 a.m. according to the timestamp. The creature was back, but this time it wasn't hunting. It was just standing there, maybe 15 feet from the camera, completely motionless, staring directly at the lens. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't an animal that happened to wander past a motion sensor. This was deliberate. It knew the camera was there, and it wanted to be seen. The footage ran for almost 3 full minutes. Just this massive, hair-covered figure standing absolutely still, its eyes reflecting back at the camera like 2 coins catching light. Then, slowly, it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. That second clip should have scared me, should have made me rethink everything. But instead, it just made me more determined. Because if it knew the camera was there, that meant it was intelligent. Really intelligent. And that made it even more of a prize. God, I was stupid. I made my decision that same day. I was going back out there the following night, and I was going to track it down. The problem was, this had to stay quiet. Hunting something like this was definitely not legal. Hell, it probably wasn't even safe. But more than that, if word got out that I'd seen one, there'd be people crawling all over these woods, tourists with cameras, cryptozoology types, maybe even federal agents if they took it seriously enough. And then my chance would be gone. So I didn't tell anyone, not my wife, not my hunting buddies, nobody. Just went about my day like normal, all while planning out how I'd approach this. I'd spent my whole life in these woods, knew them better than most people know their own backyard. The area where the camera caught the footage was rough terrain, lots of deadfall and thick underbrush, but there were ways through if you knew where to look. I'd be carrying my rifle, obviously, my good one, not the old 30-006 I used for deer. This was a .338 Winchester Magnum. Enough stopping power for anything that walked on this continent. The plan was simple. Get to the area before dark. Find a good position with clear sight lines. Wait. If it showed up again, I'd take my shot. Clean, quick, humane as I could make it. Then I'd field dress it, get it back to my truck somehow, and figure out the rest from there. I told my wife I was going out for an overnight hunt. She didn't ask questions. After 20 years of marriage, she was used to me disappearing into the woods for days at a time. September 19th. I headed out around 4 p.m., giving myself plenty of time to get into position before sunset. Carried my rifle, a good knife, some rope, water, and not much else. Wanted to travel light. The hike in took about an hour and a half. I knew exactly where I was going. Found the spot where I'd mounted the camera and set up about 40 yards away, downwind, with a good view of the creek and the surrounding area. Then I waited. If you've never hunted before, you don't know what that waiting is like. It's not like sitting on your couch watching TV. You have to stay perfectly still, perfectly quiet, every sense on high alert. Listening for the snap of a twig, watching for movement in the corner of your vision, controlling your breathing so the steam doesn't give you away in the cold air. Hours passed. The sun went down, the temperature dropped, my legs cramped from staying in one position, and I started to wonder if maybe it was too smart for this, if showing itself to the camera was a way of saying it knew I'd come looking and it had no intention of being found. Then, around 11 p.m., I heard something. Not close, maybe 100 yards off to my left, something big moving through the brush. I turned my head slowly, trying to pinpoint the direction. The sound stopped, started again, closer now, stopped. It was moving in a pattern, circling almost, like it was checking the area before committing to coming out into the open. My heart rate picked up. I eased the rifle into position, finger resting outside the trigger guard, safety still on, waited, and then I saw it. It emerged from the tree line about 60 yards away. Even in the darkness, with just moonlight filtering through the canopy, I could tell it was the same one from the footage. Same size, same build, same way of moving that was almost human but not quite. It walked to the creek, knelt down, cupped water in its hands, and drank. The whole time, its head was turning, scanning the forest around it, listening, watching. I had a shot, not a great one, but decent, center mass, maybe slightly quartering away. But I held off. Something told me to wait. Maybe it was hunter's instinct, maybe it was just curiosity. But I wanted to see more. It finished drinking and stood up, started walking along the creek bank, moving parallel to my position. And that's when I made my first mistake. I tried to adjust my position to follow it, and my boot scraped against a rock. The thing froze, turned its head directly toward where I was hiding. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. Me not breathing, it not moving. Just staring in my direction like it could see through the darkness and the brush and the trees right to where I was crouched. Then it did something I wasn't expecting. It started moving again, but not away. It was heading deeper into the forest. And from my angle, I could see it wasn't running, it was just walking. Casual almost, like it wanted me to follow. I gave it a minute, then started moving as quietly as I could. This was dangerous, and I knew it. Following something into dark woods when you're not sure what it's capable of is how people get hurt. But I'd come this far. I wasn't turning back now. I tracked it by sound mostly. Every few minutes I'd hear branches moving or leaves rustling, always about 50 yards ahead of me. Never so far that I lost it completely, but never close enough that I could get another clear look. After about 20 minutes of this, I came into a small clearing, stopped to catch my breath and get my bearings. That's when I noticed the trees. There were marks on them, long, deep scratches running vertically down the bark, fresh ones judging by the sap. I approached one of the trees and put my hand up to the marks. They were high, higher than I could reach even on my toes, and they were made by something with claws or nails strong enough to gouge into living wood. This was territory marking, had to be, like a bear rubbing on a tree or a big cat scratching to sharpen its claws. Except the scale was all wrong. These marks started 8 feet up and ran down to about chest height, but that wasn't all. As I looked around the clearing more carefully, I started noticing other things. Strange things that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There were objects hanging from the lower branches. At first, I thought they were just debris caught in the trees, but as I got closer, I realized they'd been placed there deliberately. Woven together almost. One was made from deer antlers, small ones, maybe from a young buck. They'd been lashed together with what looked like strips of bark to form a kind of cross shape. It was hanging from a branch at about eye level, turning slowly in the night breeze. Another was a collection of bird skulls, 7 or 8 of them, all clean and white, strung together on a vine and draped over a branch. They clacked together quietly when the wind moved them, making a sound like wind chimes made of bone. There were others too, arrangements of pine cones stacked in careful pyramids on flat rocks. A circle of white stones, each about the size of my fist, laid out in a perfect ring around the base of a massive oak. And in the center of that circle, a pile of feathers. Hundreds of them, all different sizes and colors, arranged in a pattern I couldn't quite make sense of. This wasn't random. This wasn't an animal collecting shiny objects or building a nest. This was intentional, purposeful, almost like decorations or offerings. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing. In all my years hunting these woods, I'd never come across anything like this. And the placement was too deliberate to be anything but intelligent design. These things had meaning. I just had no idea what. That should have been my warning. Should have told me I was dealing with something far more complex than I'd imagined. But I was too focused on the hunt to listen to what my gut was trying to tell me. I heard movement again and dropped low, moving as quietly as I could toward the sound. The creature was maybe 40 yards ahead now in another small clearing between the trees. What I saw next, I still have trouble believing. It was kneeling on the ground, or the closest thing to kneeling given its body structure. Its long arms were extended out to its sides, palms up, and its head was tilted back, facing the sky through the canopy above. It stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds, completely still, silent. Then it lowered its head and began making sounds. Not the grunts or howls you'd expect from an animal. These were different. Rhythmic, almost musical. Low tones that seemed to come from deep in its chest, rising and falling in a pattern that repeated itself. It wasn't random vocalization. It was structured, deliberate, like it was chanting. The sound went on for several minutes. Sometimes it would pause, stay silent for a moment, then start again. The pattern changed slightly each time, but there was a consistency to it, a cadence that felt ceremonial. I watched through my scope, not even thinking about taking a shot, just trying to understand what I was seeing. This thing was performing some kind of ritual, prayer maybe, or meditation, or something I didn't have words for. After the vocalization stopped, it reached down and picked up something from the ground in front of it. I couldn't see clearly what it was in the darkness, but it looked like more feathers. It held them up toward the sky, stayed like that for another moment, then carefully placed them back down. Then it stood, turned, and continued walking deeper into the forest. I followed, but something had shifted in my head. I'd gone into this hunt thinking I was tracking an animal. A big, rare, intelligent animal, sure, but still fundamentally just a beast. What I was watching now was something else entirely. This thing had culture, traditions, beliefs maybe. It created art, if that's what those markers were. It performed rituals that suggested some kind of spiritual awareness. That's when the full weight of what I was planning really hit me. I wasn't just hunting an animal, I was hunting something that might be closer to a person than I wanted to admit. But even then, even with that realization, I didn't turn back. The selfish part of me, the part that wanted that trophy more than anything, pushed those thoughts aside, told myself that it didn't matter what it was, that I'd come too far to quit now. Looking back, I can't believe how twisted my thinking was, how I justified it all to myself. But that's the truth of it. I kept following. The creature led me through areas I'd never been before, deeper into old-growth forest where the trees were so thick they blocked out most of the moonlight. Every so often I'd spot more of those markers, more antlers tied together, more arrangements of stones and bones. At one point, I passed a tree that had symbols carved into it. Not random scratches, but actual shapes, circles and lines that formed patterns I couldn't interpret, but that clearly meant something. How long had these things been out here? How many of them were there? And how had they managed to stay hidden for so long when they were clearly building some kind of culture right under our noses? The anthropology student in me that had died decades ago started waking up. This was incredible. This was evidence of a species we didn't know existed, with behavioral complexity that rivaled our own ancestors, maybe rivaled us. But the hunter in me was still dominant, still focused on the goal, still seeing this as a prize to be won rather than a discovery to be protected. Then I heard it again, off to my right this time. Footsteps in leaves. I turned toward the sound, squinting into the shadows. That's when I saw it moving between the trees. Not walking now, playing almost. It would grab a fallen branch thick as my forearm and swing it around like a club, testing its weight, getting a feel for it. Then it would rear back and throw it, and I swear it flew 60, 70 feet before crashing into the underbrush. It did this several times. Each throw was aimed at a different target, a different tree trunk. And each time it would pause afterward like it was evaluating its accuracy, learning, improving. This wasn't play, this was practice. This thing was training itself. I'd read enough anthropology in college to understand what that meant. Tool use isn't that rare in the animal kingdom. Chimps use sticks to fish for termites. Crows drop nuts on roads to crack them open. But this was different. This was weaponization, the deliberate practice of using an object as a projectile, developing accuracy and power. That's how humans became apex predators, not through claws or venom or raw strength, but through our ability to throw things, spears, rocks, anything we could get our hands on. Our shoulder structure, our hand-eye coordination, our brains calculating trajectory and force. That's what separated us from everything else. And here was this creature doing the same thing, which meant it wasn't just intelligent, it was strategic. It was preparing for something. Conflict maybe, hunting, defense, which made what I was planning to do even worse and even more dangerous. I wish I could say that realization made me stop, made me lower my rifle and head home. But it didn't. If anything, it made me want it more, because something that human, that intelligent, mounted on my wall would be the ultimate trophy, proof that I'd conquered something that was almost our equal. I'm not proud of that thought, not at all, but I have to own it because that's who I was that night. I kept following. The creature led me deeper into the forest through terrain I didn't recognize. We were off the trails now in old growth that probably hadn't seen a human in decades. Eventually, we came to another clearing, bigger than the first. Maybe 50 feet across, roughly circular, ringed by massive pines that had to be 100 years old or more. The creature walked to the center of the clearing and stopped. Just stood there with its back to me, completely still. This was it. This was my shot. Clear line of sight, good distance, solid rest if I braced against the tree next to me. My hand moved to the safety, clicked it off, raised the rifle, found the scope, put the crosshair's center mass right between the shoulder blades, controlled my breathing, in, out, started applying pressure to the trigger, and then something hit me from behind like a freight train. I didn't even have time to process what happened. 1 second I was aiming, the next I was face down in the dirt with the wind knocked out of me and my head ringing like a church bell. Something huge was on top of me. I felt hands, massive hands, grabbing my arms and wrenching them behind my back. My rifle clattered away into the leaves. I tried to fight, tried to get up, but whatever had me was incredibly strong. It felt like trying to fight a bear. I managed to turn my head enough to see it. Another one, bigger than the first, darker fur, even more massive through the shoulders. It had come up behind me while I was focused on the one in the clearing. I'd been set up. They'd worked together to position me exactly where they wanted me. The second creature grabbed the back of my head and slammed it into the ground. Not hard enough to kill me, but hard enough that everything went black for a second. When my vision came back, all I could see was stars and shadows. I felt myself being dragged. Tried to stay conscious, tried to see where I was being taken, but I kept fading in and out. The first thing I became aware of was the pain. My shoulders felt like they were being pulled from their sockets as something hauled me across the forest floor. My shirt had ridden up and I could feel every rock, every root, every piece of broken branch scraping across my skin. I forced my eyes open. Everything was sideways and blurry. I could see the ground rushing past, see my own arms stretched out ahead of me, see these massive hands wrapped around my wrists. The grip was incredible, like steel cables. Then everything went black again. When I came to the second time, I was still being dragged. I could hear breathing above me, deep, powerful breaths, and I could smell that earthy scent again, stronger now. Dirt and pine and something else, something wild. I tried to move my legs, tried to get any kind of purchase on the ground, but my body wasn't responding right. My head was swimming. Everything hurt. That's when I heard them talking. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't English, obviously, wasn't any human language. But it wasn't just animal sounds either. These were vocalizations with structure, patterns, back and forth communication. The one dragging me made a series of low grunts, deep, rumbling sounds that seemed to come from its chest. Another voice answered from somewhere to my left. This one was higher pitched, faster. The sounds overlapped, interrupted each other. There was urgency in it. Then a third voice joined in. This one was different, slower, more measured. It made a sound like a long, drawn-out huff, followed by a series of clicks and short barks. They were arguing. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were disagreeing about something, about me probably, about what to do with me. The dragging stopped. I was dropped onto the ground and pain shot through my back as I landed on something hard. A rock, maybe. I tried to roll over, tried to see what was happening, but my head was spinning too much. Through blurred vision, I could see them. 3 of them now, standing in a rough circle around me. The big one that had taken me down was in the center. The one I'd been stalking was to its left. And a third one, slightly smaller but still massive, was on the right. The argument continued. The big one made a sharp, barking sound and gestured toward me with one long arm. Not quite pointing, but close. The gesture was aggressive, threatening. The smaller one responded with a series of rapid-fire vocalizations, higher-pitched, almost questioning. It moved closer to me, leaned down to look at my face. I could see its eyes reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the trees. There was something in that look. Curiosity maybe, or evaluation. Then the one I'd been tracking stepped forward. It made a sound I hadn't heard before, a long, low tone that rose and fell like a wave. The other 2 stopped, turned to look at it. It spoke again, same pattern, same tone, but shorter this time. More emphatic. The big one didn't like that. It made a deep, growling sound and moved toward the one from the clearing. They were maybe 3 feet apart now, and I could feel the tension even through my semi-conscious haze. What happened next was like watching 2 silverback gorillas square off. The big one drew itself up to its full height, which had to be close to 9 feet. Its shoulders seemed to broaden even more. It beat its chest once, twice, the sound echoing through the forest like a drum. The one from the clearing didn't back down. It matched the posture, stood tall, and made its own display. Not as aggressive, but firm, holding its ground. They stared at each other for what felt like forever. The smaller one had backed away, watching nervously. The tension was thick enough to cut. Then the big one made a sound like a snarl and swung, not at the other creature, but at a nearby tree. Its hand, if you could call it that, connected with the trunk so hard I heard wood crack. The trees shook, leaves rained down. It was a demonstration, a show of strength, a way of saying, "This is what I could do to you." The one from the clearing didn't flinch, just stood there, waiting. For a moment, I thought they were going to fight, really fight, and I was lying on the ground between them, helpless. But then the smaller one made a sound, soft, almost pleading. It moved between them, not touching either, but positioning itself as a barrier. It vocalized again, and this time both of the others turned to look at it. Whatever it said must have worked. The big one huffed, a sound of clear frustration, and stepped back. It turned away, paced a few steps, then turned back. Made another series of vocalizations, but quieter now, less aggressive. The one from the clearing responded, still calm, still measured. The exchange went on for maybe a minute, back and forth, and gradually the tension in the air lessened. Finally, the big one made one last sound, something between a grunt and a sigh, and gestured toward me again. This time it wasn't threatening, more like resignation. The one from the clearing nodded, actually nodded, the way a human would. Then it bent down, grabbed my arms, and started dragging me again. I slipped back into darkness. The next period of time is fragmented in my memory. I'd drift in and out of consciousness, catch glimpses of what was happening, then fade again. At one point, I remember seeing the sky, stars through branches. The moon was lower now, which meant hours had passed. Or maybe it was a different night entirely. I couldn't tell. I heard water, a creek or stream nearby, felt something cold on my face. One of them was washing the blood off, maybe. The sensation was almost gentle. More vocalizations, quieter now. The argument seemed to be over. There was discussion, but it was calmer, collaborative even. I felt hands on my shoulders, my legs, being lifted, carried, not dragged. The motion was smoother now, more careful. At one point, I became aware that we were moving downhill. I could feel the angle, feel gravity pulling at me. The trees were different here, younger, closer together. We were heading out of the old growth. I heard a sound in the distance that took me a moment to place. Then I recognized it, a car driving on pavement. We were near the road. That's when reality started to sink in. They were taking me back to where I'd started, back to civilization. Why? After what I'd tried to do, why not just leave me in the forest? Or worse, I didn't understand, couldn't understand. But I didn't have the strength to question it. One more fade to black, and when I came to again, I was on my back staring up at the sky. I don't know how long I was out, could have been minutes, could have been hours. But when I finally came to, really came to, I was lying on my back staring up at the sky. It took me a minute to remember where I was, what had happened. My head was throbbing, my arms ached. I tasted blood in my mouth. I tried to sit up, and that's when I realized I was at the edge of the forest. I could see the road about 200 yards away, the same road I'd parked my truck on. How I'd gotten back there, I had no idea. The last thing I remembered was being deep in the woods, miles from anywhere. Something was next to me. I turned my head slowly and saw my trail cameras, all 6 of them, torn from their mounts and piled up next to where I'd been laid out. Some were smashed beyond recognition, others looked intact, just covered in dirt and scratches. They'd gathered them, knew what they were, knew I'd put them there, and they'd brought them back to me. My rifle was gone. So was my knife. Just me, my cameras, and the forest's edge. That's when I heard them. I looked up, and they were there. 5 of them. standing in a rough semicircle about 15 feet away, just inside the tree line where the shadows were thick. The one I'd been tracking was in the center. The big one that had ambushed me was to its right. The other three I hadn't seen before, but they were all huge, all watching me with those dark eyes that seemed to reflect too much light. A couple of them were making sounds, not quite growls, but guttural, rumbling noises from deep in their chests. Body language that didn't need translation. They were angry, really angry. I tried to push myself back, away from them, but my arms weren't working right. Everything hurt. So I just lay there, waiting for what I knew was coming. The one from the clearing stepped forward. The other stayed back, but kept making those rumbling sounds, kept staring. This one walked right up to me, close enough that I could smell it. Not the stink you'd expect, not like a zoo or anything like that. More like earth and rain and the forest itself. It looked down at me for a long moment. I looked back because what else was I going to do? Couldn't run, couldn't fight, just had to face whatever came next. Then it spoke, one word, clear as day, just no. It pointed at me, then at itself, then back at me. No. Then it pointed at the forest behind it. Same gesture, same word. No. It held my eyes for another few seconds, and I understood. I understood completely. It was telling me I couldn't hunt it, couldn't hunt them. And it was telling me to stay out of their woods. A warning, that's all this was, a warning. Then it turned and walked back into the forest. The others followed, though a couple kept looking back over their shoulders, those low rumbling sounds still coming from their throats. In less than a minute, they disappeared completely, like they'd never been there at all. I lay there for probably another hour before I could stand up. When I finally made it to my feet, I gathered up what was left of my cameras and started the walk back to my truck. Every step hurt. I was pretty sure I'd cracked a rib or two, had a lump on the back of my head the size of a golf ball, bruises everywhere. But I was alive. I was alive. They could have killed me, easily. That big one could have crushed my skull when it slammed me down, could have broken my neck when it dragged me through the forest. Instead, they just knocked me out and brought me back, given me a warning and let me go. Got back to my truck just as the sun was coming up. I can't tell you how superhuman it was to be moving with broken ribs. Every single step felt like hell. I managed to get back in the truck though and drove back home. Threw the broken cameras in the trash and drove home. Back home, my wife went crazy when she spotted me. You know how a woman would scream when you do something stupid? Well, it was 10 times worse than that. I don't think I got a scolding like that since I was a little boy. Told my wife I'd slipped on some wet rocks and taken a fall. She took me straight to the hospital. I couldn't really say anything to that. Just took some painkillers and slept while she was driving me to the nearest hospital. They held me there for 1 week until I demanded to be back home. A few days later, when I could move without wanting to scream, I looked through the cameras that were still intact. 2 of them had survived, and their SD cards were readable. There was footage, lots of it. Mostly the usual stuff, deer and small game, but there were clips that stood out. Walking past the camera, then stopping and staring directly at it for several minutes. They knew. They'd known all along that I was watching. Maybe they were the ones luring and hunting me. I can't understand their behavior. If they were this smart to know where these cameras were, why would they let themselves be filmed in the first place? I have no idea. I threw away these cameras, the ones that survived their attacks and still had the new footage. My mind was changed now. I no longer wanted any trophies from my living room. I always thought of deleting the first images I got back then too, the ones that made me go into the forest. But I'm still clinging to them for now, a reminder of my stupidity. But I never did set up any more cameras in the forest. I know it is their home. I wouldn't want someone to set cameras in my own home, so I will grant them this courtesy. That was 14 years ago now. I still live in the same place, on the edge of the same forest. But I don't hunt there anymore. Actually, I don't really hunt at all these days. Took down most of the trophies in my cabin, donated them or threw them out. Can't look at them the same way anymore. Can't see them as achievements, just see them as things I killed because I wanted to prove I could. Sometimes at night, I'll hear sounds in the woods behind my property, trees falling that shouldn't fall, calls that don't match any animal I know. And I'll wonder if they're still out there, watching, making sure I'm keeping my end of the deal. I think about that night a lot, about what would have happened if they'd decided I wasn't worth the warning, if they just ended it right there in that clearing. No one would have ever known what really happened to me. I'd have just been another hunter who went into the woods and never came back. But they didn't. They chose to let me live, chose to teach me a lesson instead of making me pay the full price for my stupidity. I've never told this story before. My wife still thinks I just fell on some rocks. My friends think I lost my taste for hunting because I'm getting old. And maybe that's better. Maybe some things are meant to stay in the woods where they happened. But I needed to write it down, needed to admit what I almost did and what stopped me. Not to warn other people, because anyone with sense knows better than to go after something like that. More to remind myself how close I came to making the worst mistake of my life. They're out there, I know they are, and they're smarter than we give them credit for. Smart enough to avoid us when they want to. Smart enough to defend themselves when they need to. Smart enough to show mercy when we don't deserve it. I got lucky, got a second chance I absolutely did not earn, and I'm not stupid enough to waste it. Those woods belong to them, they always have, and I'm content to leave it that way. For more interesting stories, check this out.